Welcome back. In this video I visit my friend Alex, who's planted a 2-kilometre long syntropic food forest system using no irrigation and propagating most of her own fruit trees.
Squashes, they're all coming to.
Hi, I'm Alex and welcome to our property here in Kyogle. So I'll take you through a bit of the backstory of how we ended up in a town that we'd actually never heard of. I actually studied banking and finance, believe it or not, at uni, and after working in a grey cubicle and basically listening to the conversation that was all about the next promotion or mortgage or which car people would like to buy, I kind of thought, why am I at uni studying so hard for a life that's based around all these kind of material possessions? What I did is I thought, right, I've done my degree now, so I'm going to actually pack up all of my things and head overseas for a year and see the world before I start out in my corporate career. That 1 year off ended up turning into nearly 10 years overseas, and I ended up working on the super yachts and also these beautiful sailing yachts for many years. I worked over in the Mediterranean as well as the Caribbean, and it was funny too, because even though I'd made the decision to get away from the material things, I ended up being in this world that was more materialistic than I'd ever experienced in my life. So a lot of the people I worked for were either multi-millionaire or billionaire hedge fund owners, and it was all about the possessions. I wanted to get away from the big super yachts, and I ended up on these much smaller sailing yachts, and we did some amazing races around the world. But one of those defining moments was when I was on watch. It was the middle of the night. We were out of sight of land, and it was just myself on deck underneath the beautiful stars and all of the phosphorescence lighting up as the sailing yacht was moving through the water. And I remember having this beautiful vision of having this much more simple, self-sustainable lifestyle, and that was kind of that defining moment where the dream could have began, but I had no idea how it would happen. And so I befriended this girl, and she was telling me about this English friend of hers that had done a permaculture course in Jordan. And I was asking, what's permaculture? And when she explained what it was, I said, yes, this is this vision I've had when I was sailing under the stars and dreaming up this kind of more self-sufficient lifestyle. So that was my little introduction to permaculture, and that kind of, it's like a seed was sown. After, I think, nearly 10 years sailing, I ended up moving back to Australia, and lo and behold, the rental property that I got just outside of Daylesford was on the same street as David Holmgren. So from this little seed that was sown, I ended up living on the same street as David Holmgren and did a few tours of his property and started learning more and more about this concept of permaculture. After I moved away from Daylesford, because I couldn't cope with the 8 months of winter that we had there, I was really looking for a more subtropical climate, I ended up moving to Nelson Bay, and I continued my work working on the marinas. And that's where I met my partner, Dale. And we were living in the suburbs, a couple of blocks back from the beach, but we felt we were getting more and more claustrophobic, and we kept thinking, no, we need more space, we need this more connection with the land. Basically, we're at the tail end of the worst drought in recorded history. So when we arrived at the property, it was covered in smoke from the nearby bushfires. It was completely brown, and we thought, well, if we like it now, it can only get better. So that's how the journey started. We wanted a rainforest property. We ended up buying a completely bare cow paddock. And then with the timing, basically it was just the beginning of COVID. So we thought, well, we don't know anyone here. Neither of us had jobs. So what we set out to do was I just started propagating trees and started planting out the property. So before we moved up this way, I actually quit my job at the marina. I'd had enough of the boats, and I actually started volunteering in a nursery because we knew we wanted to move to the countryside, and I just had this absolute passion for plants. The problem I was experiencing is once you've got 10 acres of land, it ends up getting really, really expensive if you want to retree the property. So it wasn't necessarily the plan to retree the property when we moved here, but what happened is we had one of the hottest springs in recorded history, I believe. And so this paddock was absolutely baking. There was no cover whatsoever. And I was quite distraught because all the plants I'd brought up with me were actually baking even through the shade cloth. They were all burning. It was that extreme. I think it hit where we're standing now. It actually hit 46 degrees one day. So very distraught. I went over the creek. You can see the beautiful Moreton Bay fig, and I stood under this Moreton Bay fig and some black beans, and the temperature difference was absolutely incredible. 10 to 15 degrees difference. And that was the moment I decided, right, we're retreeing the property. And again, we weren't working at the time because we just moved here. We didn't know anyone, so it was kind of perfect timing. So that's why I kind of set up the nursery, because financially it just wasn't viable to try and buy all the trees. So that's where the love of plants started. And then during the drought, we just started driving around, and I started looking at what was still managing to thrive in the drought conditions. As I said, because the dams were dry and the creek was dry, I had to plant things that were tough. So that's where I think the love of trees came in. And the other thing was we had the veggie patch, and I couldn't water it because our tanks were low and we don't have a bore. And I thought if we were relying on the veggie crops, we'd actually be starving now. So hardy fruit trees were one of those things where I thought, right, that's kind of the way forward, things that don't need irrigating. You'll see, and with the plantings, this was a way of basically having swales without digging the actual trenches, if you like. So you'll notice this here in front of the house is kind of this syntropic style food forest system. So for me, syntropics means just mimicking nature. When I started researching about how to plant out traditional orchards, how to be self-sufficient with food systems, it was so complicated and it was so expensive to set up with major earthworks, running irrigation lines, constructing dams, tanks, you name it. So I thought, look, we're just outside of the border ranges here and we have magnificent forests all around us. Surely there's a way of just mimicking what nature does, and then it tends to take care of itself. So what I thought was, I didn't like the idea of just straight rows because I felt it was a bit too jarring on the landscape. So to have the rows in harmony with the landscape, I actually planted the food forest and also the rainforest and long-term timber plantings on contour. It turned out as well, when I assessed the slope of the land, it was a bit steep for swales, so you really have to do this massive back cut to help stabilize the soil. So what I've done is I've kind of tried to mimic a forest whilst having the trees planted on contour, so that I'm able to maintain access paths throughout the system. So what I've done is I've done basically 4 separate guilds with the food forest system. So I've got one that's got things like pecans and apples and stone fruit and mulberries. And then the next row behind that will be things like acacias, ice cream bean, there's feijoas, guavas, and a few others mixed in. And then behind that, I've got more Mediterranean style rows. So there's things like citrus, figs, pomegranate. And throughout all of these, I've also integrated to get those layers of the forest canopy working for me. So I've got lower shrubs like the smaller citrus. Then I've got kind of more larger fruit trees. So there's things like mangoes and avocados in there as well. And then I've got this emergent layer as well. So I've got things like blue quandongs, silky oaks, and even the silky oaks they use overseas to shade their coffee plantations. And I've got things like eucalypts in there as well, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but when they're pruned, this is one of the fastest ways of creating biomass and just building the soil. So we're dealing with very compacted soil from the years and years of cattle use on the property. And so this is the way of creating that forest system so it looks after itself, because again, I had to create a system that wasn't relying on irrigation. Once I get that canopy layer up and I'm reducing the effects of frost, then I will start planting the understory. So things like aloe vera and coffee and taro and turmeric and ginger and things like that. So I'm transitioning the paddock from basically a bacterial system with the grass and the cow manure into a forest or kind of fungal network, if you like. So once we start, when the wet season starts, I'll do the first heavy prune of both of these systems, which is really exciting. So we're going to trim all of those nitrogen fixing support species as well as the eucalypts and start creating that forest floor and just building that soil humus and helping to reduce the effects of the decompaction as well from the cattle. This is the south facing slope, so it actually creates a much cooler microclimate to the slope where we were at before. That gets all the winter sun and dries out a lot faster, whereas this southern facing slope, you can see this is just full of clover and flowers, and at the same time it's full of bees, butterflies and various insects. So having that shade that helps shade the alleyways, if you like, so you can see there's bees here that absolutely love it. It just helps create that trap in that moisture and have this system being much more lush with that additional shade. The end game for this property is basically have a system that hopefully will last decades and decades with very minimal input. Got about 2 kilometres of fruit tree rows here, so there's so many fruit trees, and a lot of people have asked me, well, what are you going to do with all that fruit? But I'd love to have community events where we can harvest all the fruit and make all amazing produce. Love to get kids involved at the local schools, get the local community involved, and hopefully be able to have a little bit of an education hub but not too serious. So I'd like people to be able to play in the tree rows, the kids playing in the tree rows and harvesting fruit, and so that's kind of, I guess, a goal of just showing what's possible with without all the complexities of irrigation and heavy machinery and things like that. So this is where it all happens. It's I'm really running out of space. It's one of the constant problems I have. So I've actually integrated, I've got raised beds with veggies, but I've also got trays and trays of fruit trees and rainforest trees. So here I've got things like Malabar chestnut. Now these I found, where was it? There was a mother tree that was basically throwing seed everywhere, and the seeds were just sprouting in the compost pile. So I grabbed the seeds and potted them up. So there's probably about 150 Malabar chestnuts in that tiny space. I've got Grummy Charmer or the tropical cherry here. There's things like custard apples. So I'll just collect fruit from either friends' places or the markets, and anything that's really good, I collect the seeds and I put it in the ground. So I just, this is kind of where I've started the seed trays. So I just get a mix of kind of river sand and compost. And so this is an example. Let me have a look. So these are different. We've got amaranth popping up everywhere, so I won't put that in the veggie patches again. So these are all different nitrogen fixing support trees that I've got growing everywhere. And what else have we got? We've got peanut butter trees. So that was fruit from a friend's property, but again, I apologize, I have to water and weed. There's persimmons. I've got plum pine, which is a beautiful rainforest tree, but also edible. And so it's a constant form of chaos, if you like, but it seems to work quite well. So this is how I propagate thousands of trees for nothing, basically. So when I've done my plantings, I've had a look for things that are basically drought tolerant, frost tolerant, flood tolerant. So starting with all the super tough hardy stuff that won't need constant kind of inputs from myself. And then as this forest system matures, you're going to have understory of things like, you can see in the nursery here, I've got things like pineapples growing. There's things like, this is a galangal, there's turmeric and ginger, so that'll be like the understory, if you like. Then the next layer up will be things like maybe citrus, guavas, so between kind of 2 to 4 meters tall, if you like. And then above that layer, you've got things like mangoes, longans, lychees, avocados, filling up that other kind of niche in the forest canopy. And then above that, an emergent layer of rainforest species. So things like the Grevillea silky oak, the blue quandong, and what else have I got? Some different eucalypts, which can be heavily pruned as well to create kind of that forest floor mulch. And we've been through for lots of walks through the national parks around the area and just observing, okay, what's growing lower down to the ground, what do we see way up in the top of the canopy, and just trying to mimic that system on our own property. So obviously we couldn't just put rainforest species, really delicate rainforest species, straight in the paddock. We had to start with those pioneer species to start building the soil and creating the shelter for the more delicate species. The huge change that I've seen within myself is I used to be in a constant state of stress and anxiety, and often depression would pop up. I was always worried about whether I was doing things right, being successful. And since I've come here, it's like I've just experienced the ultimate freedom, actually. So living off the land has just given me that, I think, just reconnecting with nature. And I feel like before I was in this kind of fake world where I was working so hard but nothing had any sort of meaning. So you know, I was in, as I mentioned previously, I was in finance, I was in real estate as well, and many other jobs in between, but I always seemed to be searching for something else that had meaning. And coming here, it's kind of, you know, a little bit, what's the word? It's that finding the meaning of life, finding my purpose, I think. And I think that's the greatest gift of my life, is finding something that I'm this passionate about. Even if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would still be doing exactly the same thing, which is planting heaps of trees, propagating, pottering around in the nursery, and yeah, watching everything grow. It's the greatest joy. And I actually set up a YouTube channel, Dreams of Green, and I set it up basically to document the journey here, thinking absolutely no one would be interested and no one would watch it, and that was just under 2 months ago, and it's actually done really well. So people seem to be interested in this topic, so be sure to check it out if you're wanting to learn more about how to propagate all these trees for free, and how to set up all of your food forest and native rainforest systems for next to nothing.
I hope you enjoyed the video and what Alex has achieved. If you like the video, please share and subscribe with your friends and family so we can spread the love of syntropics, regenerative farming and self-reliance.